Oh, hi everyone. Welcome back for another interview. And I have got the beautiful Cat Marshall here, who I met many, many, many years ago in a red tent,
In a
which
red
was actually
tent, yeah.
a red tent, but it was in someone's house. So don't get too fancy with the with the image. And since then, Kat's had children. One of her children's been on a huge cancer journey, and Kat has also birthed this amazing business as well. So she's got so many strings to her bow. But we're here today to talk about her beautiful son, Marshall, and his cancer journey and how that affected the whole family and her and him. And so let's just dive in. Welcome, Kat.
Hi,
Hi.
it's so lovely to see you, and I'm so thrilled to be here. I, as we were just saying, have followed your journey. We've known each other for years, but not necessarily been that close. But I've followed yours, and you followed mine, and there's been this kind of interaction over years. So it feels a lovely place to be able to kind of share those things today and have
Yeah.
a chat about it.
And both be in a place where we've come through the trauma.
Yeah, we're on the other side.
The other side now, and things that we can breathe. There's a bit more
Yeah,
breathing space, isn't there? So,
absolutely. Yeah.
so go back to the beginning. So Marshall was diagnosed when he was 2.
Yeah, so I had Marshall was about to, so we'd already been crazily, we'd had a crazy year already. And I had a second son who was born about the kind of November time. So we were in that newborn phase. And unfortunately, my other second son went through congenital pneumonia, suspected sepsis. Then Marshall had so when he was 2 days old, that happened. Then the little one was 2 weeks old, and Marshall had an abscess on his leg which came out of nowhere, which required surgery. That was crazy. So he was in hospital for that. Then the second one, Colby, he was 8 weeks old. He had suspected meningitis, and then he nearly died in hospital of an anaphylactic shock. And then at the same time, Colby got really ill with bronchiolitis, and Will was in hospital, my partner. So it was like this crazy ride of hospitals ever since Colby was born. And people kept saying to me, like, oh my God, what's happening? This kind of happened now. This kind of happened now. And we were also moving house at that time. So we decided the house was kind of came out of the blue. And Marshall, through this time at the age of 2, was just getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And it was really things that were very hard to define. So by
Mm.
that, I mean, he was incredibly moody. He was having meltdowns. And I don't just mean tantrums, I mean full blown meltdowns where we couldn't get through to him. He was waking up in the middle of the night, screaming his little heart out. Or if I picked him up, he'd say, like, mummy hurting me, mummy hurting me. And I think I'm, I, I don't know I don't know what I'm doing here. I can't be hurting you. Why is it hurting behind your knees, for example? And then he stopped eating and he just became exceptionally pale and he lost a lot of weight. And I was getting really worried through all this. I was like going back to the GP going, there's something really not right here. There's something really not right here. And we had quite a lot of, well, he's got a new sibling and, all the stuff you get kind of,
Oh,
yeah. Um, and I think we were going backwards and forwards. And it's a story I've heard from many cancer parents, actually, that you feel that something is wrong. And it's that, when sometimes when there's nothing definitive to kind of hang your hat on, it's very difficult. It's a very challenging place when you're going, I know something is wrong with this child.
yeah.
Um, but thankfully I pushed and pushed and I said, right, let's do whatever we can. Let's get blood tests. And a few months later, he just turned 3. He was vomiting all the time for no reason, lots and lots of stuff. And I was so desperately worried about him. I was literally in hospital saying, like, I have to find someone to talk to today. Find me someone.
Yeah.
And they did. And basically got a raft of blood tests done. And they phoned us about 6 hours later and said, you need to come in. And we went back and we didn't leave hospital, actually. They just went, that's it. Jim, we're in. So he was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, which is quite, I don't want to say it's a popular cancer. It's it's one of
Lovely
the more
terms.
common ones among children. It's quite leukemias are quite common among young children. So
Yeah.
and it's quite rare, but it's one of the more common versions. So
So hearing that bit of the story, it's like, I mean, in one respect, it must have been terrifying, but also, thank God you've got a diagnosis and now you can actually
yeah,
understand going on with him. So holding
Absolutely.
two kind of like, oh, now we can get some help, but
Yeah.
also, oh
And I
shit, it's
think, yeah, I think for the first thing is that for me as a parent, like if you believe something's wrong, you have to push for your child. And I know, and sometimes we're afraid to do that. We don't know that we can, or we don't know what to ask for, but we have to do that, especially if we have that gut feeling, that intuition that's telling us that something is wrong.
yeah,
Even if it makes us look like a bit of an arse, we've got to follow that up. We've got to do what we can to push that through. And yeah, it is that. I think you also get swept into it so quickly. You don't really have time to think about all of the implications, all of the things, because our life on that day, it was like, the only way I can describe it, it was like the rug was just like ripped out from under us. Because one day you're just dawdling along, like, okay, we're coping, everything's all right. And suddenly everything you knew, everything you thought you knew, every facet of your life is just upended completely and utterly. And it's funny because Will and I talked about one of us getting ill, or, if have grown up conversations, you might say, well, what would happen if one of us became ill? Who would look after the kids? What would work look like? How would we manage? But we'd never, ever considered one of our children becoming seriously ill, or even both of our children becoming seriously ill. And it has the effect of just taking absolutely everything out of your life overnight. There's nothing that's left untouched, not your relationship with your partner, your relationship with your child, your financial circumstances, your home circumstances, care circumstance, every single part of your life, as you'll know, none of
yeah,
it's left untouched.
yeah, yeah. Wow. So, that it's a very different situation having a child with cancer than it is as an adult. So for, I was kind of really thinking about that. For me, it was kind of scary that you have this thing and you can't see it and you don't know what it's doing in your body. But I can make my own health choices. Whereas with a child, you
Yeah.
can't. You can't do, you have to go. I mean, I remember watching the Truth About Cancer videos and they talked about that in there. And I didn't know if the laws were the same in the UK as they are in America, but I know that
Gives
if
me
you say,
goosebumps when if it gives me actual goosebumps when you're talking about that, because um that's a really difficult and challenging one. So in the UK, actually, we were swept into this process. Marshall had sort of rapidly got so poorly that we were looking at kind of a life of about 6 to 8 weeks. They were like, he's probably got about 6 to 8 weeks to live if we don't get involved in something drastic doesn't happen here. And we were kind of pulled into this consultant's office and he talked to us through what was going to happen. And I genuinely believe it's a really interesting one. It's a really interesting question because I genuinely believe that the treatment that he received saved his life. I
yeah,
absolutely do, and I know it did. However, we did ask that question. We said, well, are there people that refuse treatment? What happens if you say, well, actually, I'm not happy with this, or it goes against this, or it's not what I want to do? And our consultant, basically, he's a very straight talking man, absolutely brilliant. I love him to bits, but he said, you know, your child won't be with you by this evening, if that was your stance. So we have lawyers, we contact the courts, we get a foster family, we basically take that child out because it's life-saving treatment for that child.
yeah,
You don't get a choice. We, the state, have to step in and save that child. And I find that I don't know, it's such a big conversation, but it's quite challenging and it's quite difficult because at the beginning, like for me, I was like, I totally get it. It's totally fine. This has to happen for Marshall, so I'm okay with that.
yeah,
But I do remember, so the treatment for leukemia is very long, especially for boys. So generally speaking, for girls, it's 2 years. And for boys, it's 3 years. And that's if they don't have any kind of gaps or chemo holes or stuff like that. So Marshall's treatment was actually 3.5 years by the time, like from first day of chemo to kind of the day that we finished. Because for boys, leukemia cells can basically be in their testicles and they can remain there. So they basically take a bit of an insurance period
right,
and make sure they blast it.
right,
Um, and there was a point, and I think it was probably about 2 or 2.5, 2 years in. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. He doesn't need this anymore. I don't want to be here anymore.
Yeah.
This is really, I'd felt the switch.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that for me was really hard, because I'm a bit of I like the natural ways of life, you know.
Yeah.
I'll take a paracetamol if I need one. And if there's a clear, defined reason why we need medication, that's absolutely fine. But it's not my go-to default place. I like healing in all the ways. And so I really struggled with that when we were still giving chemotherapy. And we had to do it every single day at home as well. So not only were we in hospital for intravenous chemo through his port, so he had a port cath in his chest, which is
Yeah.
basically it's an incredibly interesting medical device. It's super clever,
Yeah.
but it's like a small, I suppose you call it a pot, if you like, with a silicone cover that goes under the skin. And it's got a wire that goes, well, it was on that side of him. So it goes up, you could see the wire in his neck. It was the tube, and it went down into his heart. But it meant that you could use a needle and pierce through the skin into this kind of receptacle that was beneath the skin, and then give drugs, chemotherapy directly into the body, and also take blood, for example, if you needed to. But, you know, I remember just not being able to kind of cope with having to give him chemo anymore and struggling. So we were doing that in hospital with his port and everything. And then we were giving oral syringes of chemo at home every day. And I remember saying to Will, like, I can't go into the bedroom and drug my child while he's sleeping. I just can't do it anymore. And I got to the point where I was like, I'm going to need help with this. You need to take this bit over, because I can't do it. And like, I had to work really hard, because I think also there's so much trauma that comes up as a parent, because you're doing things to your child sometimes against their will, against your will, and against maybe what you feel could be the right particular thing at that particular time, which is really hard going. So yeah, it's a hard one when it's a child. It's a
Yeah.
journey I wish nobody had to kind of go down, a road I wish didn't exist for kids.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, how did you make sense of it for yourself? For me,
Um,
constantly looking for like the story or the reason or the what could give me comfort in this journey. And now you're out of it. You're still under kind of supervision, or they're
yeah.
keeping an eye on him. You're still having tests and things, but was there anything that comforted you, whether it was spiritual or kind of just getting you through?
It's a really interesting question, isn't it? I've thought about this so many times over the years. And I think for me, I did have a massive spiritual journey through Marshall's treatment. And part of it was looking back and, how can I put this? I always followed my intuition. There was a period of time when I didn't in my life. And then before Marshall came into my life, I started following just what I felt was right, what my intuition was guiding me towards, whether it made logical sense or not.
Yeah.
Right. And Marshall turned up in my life through completely, you could call it crazy, circuitous routes of absolute life, beautiful synchronicities and magic, essentially. And I just felt like if that had happened and he was sent to me for whatever reason he was sent to me for, then this is our path. And having this massive trust in however it's going to work out, it being the right thing, was the thing that I held on to, I think. And it's like this big exercise in trust in yourself, in what you're doing, in your journey, in your path. And it constantly asks you, invites you to go deeper on your own journey at every single stage. It's like the same, it's like you're asked to rise further, like
Yeah.
to rise more, to rise more, to rise more, and yet to go deeper and deeper and deeper at exactly the same time. And that's like the journey of it. And there are lots of people who can't cope with that, I think, in life. We're not, you know, it's not it's not something that we learn how to do in most cases. And it's such a personal journey. I don't know what you felt your journey was like, but you're nodding like, yeah, the kind
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
rising and the
yeah.
depths.
I write about it in my book. I was like, really? Another thing that I've got to get my head around, another surrendering, another kind of like, oh my God, it's
Yeah,
like, are you going to throw more at me? It's
yeah,
like, really? And there was days when I was just like, I'm not strong enough to do this.
yeah.
And then you put your warrior armor back on and go, right, because there's nothing else to do, is there? There's nothing. And people were there going, I don't know how you're coping. And it's just like, you just put one foot in front of the other. I don't know how I coped. I don't know how you coped, but we just put one foot in front of the other because that's all we can do.
I think there
And
were many, many days that I was hanging on by my fingernails for so many reasons, not
yeah,
least because Marshall's medication affected his behavior so very much that we were dealing with a child. Not only did I have a little baby, but I had another child who was like 3, 4, who had the strongest drugs in him in the world that made his behavior absolutely off the wall, uncontrollable, dangerous, violent, horrific to deal with.
wow.
And also between a breastfeeding baby that was staying up all night and a child that was either being sick, or we had obviously toileting things and nappies and all sorts to change through the night because we were on chemo, and that was also making him sweat horrifically and scream through the night and doing nappies. Like I think we were zombies for years, just holding on, like literally holding on, kind of like we'll just get through. And I remember splitting my days into like 15-minute segments, thinking, well, if I can get through this 15 minutes, I can just get through the next 15 minutes, and then I can just get through the 15 minutes after that. Because looking any further than that was, I couldn't. And actually
Overwhelmed.
yeah, it was too much. And what was interesting to me is that a few months down the line, like I described our kind of life being ripped out from under us, like that rug being pulled. A few months later, I was noticing these feelings in my body, and I couldn't pinpoint it. I was like, oh, something's weird's going on, like, but I can't grasp what it is, but I know something is strange, something shifted. And I couldn't find the feelings. And then it occurred to me like this massive light bulb moment about what it was. And I remember like feeling, and I remember this light bulb going off in my head going, it's grief.
Yeah.
It's grief for the life I think we should have been living, or the life that we should have had. All the things that we should have been doing, that the boy should have been able to do, that Marshall should have been able to do. And it was just this massive, overwhelming grief for the life that we should have had. And it's not like I had a massive expectation for that life, but
It
childhood
was.
cancer was definitely not up there on my want to do list, you know?
Wow. Yeah. And I think that's such a good tip for anyone going through this, is like, just break it down into bite-sized chunks.
Yeah,
It's like, because it is overwhelming, whatever
yeah,
choice you make. The hospital come at you with all the fear mongering and we've got to do
yeah,
this and we've got to do that and we've got to do it now. And then there's like, you might have other ideas of things you want to do or things you want to
yeah,
add in. And
yeah,
it's too much. It takes up your whole day, just, healing.
yeah, it really does. And I think
And
exactly as
like, you were not only healing with Marshall, but you were healing with yourself as well. You're listening to those feelings and you're processing them, and you're speaking about them,
mm,
which is massive.
interestingly is there's a couple of things there. So um cancer parents are among the highest people who highest kind of numbers of people who suffer with PTSD and complex PTSD, because we don't have necessarily the ability to deal with all the things that are going on. And it's quite common to see that in cancer parents. So there's that whole kind of thing. And often I've spoken to other cancer parents in hospital, and it's this weird club that nobody wants to belong to. And yet like, you're so grateful that other people belong to it and you can share those experiences. But I remember talking to a guy, and he'd said I think they were 3 or 4 years off treatment, but he was very open, and he'd said, his wife found it so difficult, and she was still suffering with her mental health, and that he couldn't cope, so he just turned to alcohol. So we come up with all of the coping mechanisms that we can grasp. I mean, I think for me, mine was food, because we were so isolated, and also probably like you, it was during COVID.
Yeah.
So we lost access to everything. We lost access to play therapists, people that could see us, anything. We were dealing with the most horrific circumstances, and hospital was like, we were there all the time anyway, but we had no access to people, play therapists, other parents' kitchen. We couldn't make a cup of tea. You're literally isolated in a room with these big, like you were saying, scaremongering signs saying you can't leave your room, you have to be escorted to the toilet. And, you know, there were times when I literally had to not eat and not go to the toilet because I couldn't leave Marshall, because we couldn't also swap parents in hospital. So even though we'd come from the same household, I wasn't allowed to breastfeed my baby. Will wasn't allowed to swap with me as a parent. It was genuinely horrific. It was so stressful. And I think a lot of parents going through that kind of thing at that time will also have sort of secondary trauma, not from just the cancer and dealing with that, but also the circumstances that we had to go through, the situations that we were put in, was very, very harsh and very, very, traumatic.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, it was barbaric, wasn't it? I mean, as an adult, obviously, I was coping with it, and I could understand why they were doing this, but it just seemed like it's so unfair that I have to come and have these really difficult conversations by myself, and I'm not allowed to bring anyone with me or my partner. It's just like,
Mm.
wow, yeah, it was in inhumane times, really.
Mm. I think the most important thing, one of the things you just said in our just what we were talking about then, was making the right decisions for you through everything.
Yeah,
And it was funny because although we had to follow the prescripted path, which actually in a way I was very happy to do because it meant that there was a path.
yeah, yeah,
Um, uh, I believed so strongly in doing what I felt was right for Marshall that I also did other things that I didn't necessarily inform my consultants of, because I kind of knew that what the response was likely to be.
yeah,
So
yeah,
for me, it was really important to gather my own kind of resources, talk to people I trusted. I consulted with a friend of mine who's a naturopathic oncologist and understands Western medicine, all of the things that go into the chemo and all the drugs that Marshall was on. But I said, like, how can I support him through this? What can I give him to supplement this? How can we make this easier on his body? What can I do to help him detox from all these things that we're pushing into him? And so there were that kind of thing that I was doing for him. And then also I would do like energy healing on him. So he wouldn't obviously let me do it when he was awake, but I used to creep into bed and lie next to him and then try and do like Reiki in all sorts of very strange angles and very weird bits, to try and get rid of some of this energy that was within him. And it was very interesting because if doing any kind of energy healing, the energy that I had off him was like pins and needles. It was like sharp, spiky points in my hands, and trying to get things off him and out of him. And that was really interesting to me, because then I heard an adult describe some of the chemotherapy they'd been through, and they described it as like, oh, it was like having pins and needles in their skin, or their skin didn't feel right. And I was like, that's exactly what I was feeling off him, you know?
yeah,
But obviously he was too young to explain any of this. And I
yeah.
used to, so I do hypnotherapy as well. So I made some recordings as well. And I used to creep into his bedroom at night and play these recordings so that he was subconsciously getting these kind of healing messages. So I was doing all sorts of things that I'm sure everybody has their own opinions about, but they were what I felt I could do and that I had to do for his healing journey.
And it gives you back a little bit of sense of control as well.
Yes,
This
it
is what I
does.
can do to support, and that, I love that. It's so beautiful. And of course, most kids are like that. I remember years ago working with an little autistic boy, and I was saying to his mum really wanted me to give him Reiki, and he would be like, "Get off me." he could feel it from across the room. So,
Yeah.
you know, it works. But yeah, sometimes it's just better to do it while they're asleep and they don't
Yeah.
know. You don't have to know. And even what you were saying earlier about, you know, he came into your life in such a magical way. You know, I always used to say to parents that because my eldest son's autistic and I worked a lot with autistic families, and I used to say, special children choose special parents.
I
And I
feel like I feel like that's definitely with Marshall, like I think.
you know, and he chose you because you could do this and you did it and you're still doing it, you know, and you shine with it. You absolutely shine with it, Kat. I mean, as hard as it is, and like, you know, the emotions there for you, and you know, thank you for your vulnerability because it's so moving.
Mm.
But it's like, you know, you need to be tough. You need to be
Yeah.
tough to do this.
I
And you
think
know,
you really do, and I think we, yeah, it's like you. It was exactly as we're called. We're called to rise again every single time we go through a new challenge, and every single time. And like you said, you're like, oh God, not more. Like, oh, now what is it going to be? And that was literally our path, you know. And I felt like that, and it's been a hard recovery to come away from that because of you are just so it's so inbuilt in you to think what's going to happen next, what's going to happen next. And you also, as a cancer parent, have a level of hypervigilance that is extreme because you're looking for every single thing. And I remember with Marshall, like we did his temperature twice a day, but it was spikes in behavior, temperature,
yeah,
odd behavior, anything we could pick up on. And if he did have a temperature, because we live so far away from hospital, and we have kind of a protocol of getting antibiotics because they don't know what the infection is necessarily in the beginning, but it can go bad very quickly. Yeah, it's literally like we've got an hour to get to hospital. We've got then an hour to get drugs into him. So really, we want to be doing that within 1.5, 2 hours. So as soon as something happens, you've got to be on it. And this level of hypervigilance that you have, because it's 24 hours. It's not like it's when they're sleeping as well. That
yeah,
takes a while to leave. It takes a while for your nervous system to go, oh my God, actually, I'm okay. I can have 15 minutes to myself and the world's not going to end.
yeah,
And I remember I did something lovely for myself. I went for a coffee and I had the little one with me, and Marshall had just started going into school. And school's about 20 minutes away from our house. And I'd gone like 15 minutes the other way. And I suddenly had this absolute panic. I was like, I've just worked out I'm like 40 minutes away from school. And if something happens and they call me and it's 40 minutes to school and then it's back an hour to hospital, and I was literally sort of in bits thinking, and I was like, I had to talk myself down to go, it's actually okay. They'll phone you if something happens. Like, we'll have enough time. Because you're just used to living in that state
yeah.
continually.
And I don't think I realized I was in that until I came out of it. You know, it's kind of like, I mean, even one of my friends just said, well, you did it with such grace, Rachel. You made it look easy.
Yeah.
But it was only, you know, after everything's over and, you know, you're all clear or whatever it is. And then I was just like, now what? Because it's like this vacuum of like, you know, I don't know if you've even got to that space yet, because obviously Marshall's still having to
I
go in and
I found we had a massive, I think 4 months after the end of chemo finished. I think actually, so chemo finished about September. We had his port out in December, which was a massive thing because there was a huge amount of trauma around that. And we got into kind of the end of January, February, so like a couple of months after that. And I fell off a cliff. I could not, I was done. I could have spent weeks and weeks and weeks in bed and not moved and just had somebody bring me soup. And of course, with two small boys, you can't do that. But I was struggling to even get out of bed, put clothes on the boys, make breakfast because I just shut down. I couldn't cope with day-to-day life. I couldn't get them ready to even think about going. I was on my arse basically, because I think we'd been holding it together for so long that when that finally came to an end and we'd had a few weeks to kind of, or a month or two to kind of stop, I just fell over, and Will did as well. We were both absolutely shattered. And it took months to recover from that, really. I'd say a good 2 or 3 months we were just flattened, really.
Mm. Yeah, and I think it's important to give yourself that time as well if you can, just to kind
Mm.
of it's like decompress, isn't it? Kind of like, yeah,
Yeah.
God, what a journey. What a
It was
journey.
funny at the time. I was offered, thankfully, because I am in a healing space, I have lots of healing friends, and they were like, "Do you want a session? Do you want to do this for me? Do you want to do some breath work? Do you want to do?" I was like, "Yes to everything." So it was a real kind of healing time for me. And I was going to share. Actually, it's very interesting. So I did a hypnotherapy session, a heart healing session with my supervisor. She's incredible, and it was quite amazing, really, because I wanted to heal my relationship with Marshall. And I felt like because we'd been through so much, I had to heal my relationship with him, what I'd put him through, all the things we'd been through. And so when I was in this hypnosis session, I could see him and he was like running around and he was playing, and I could see him like as clear as day. And he was happy and laughing and giggling. And I could see like this glass wall between us, and I could just see him doing his thing. And it wasn't my relationship with him I needed to work on. And it became interesting after that because I could see me as I am. And then I saw these two other versions of me. One other version of me was like, come over here, come into the light, come and get healed. Let's go. It's your time now. Come over here and get healed. I've got this beautiful channel of light. You can step into it, you can heal. It's totally fine. And yet there was another version of me who was like, no, 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 no. And she was holding me back. I literally could see this other version of me holding me back. And we sort of delved into it, like why I physically couldn't actually allow myself to heal. And the other version of me said, because you don't deserve it.
Wow.
And it was really kind of eye-opening and painful, because the message was that he deserves to heal, but you don't. And through all the things you've been through. And so luckily I have an amazing hypnotherapy supervisor, and she brought it together beautifully, and we managed to get to a place where it was healed and we brought all this together, and I was worthy of my own healing. But it's so incredible what we do to ourselves to not even allow ourselves to heal from some of these experiences, and how much we hold ourselves back, you know. And so that
Yeah.
was really quite fascinating.
I had a similar one in a shamanic journey where there was part of me that was like a 50s housewife with a pinny on, and it was just like, no, you can't stop. You've got to keep going, keep cleaning, keep doing
Yeah.
it. It's
Yeah.
like, just what about resting and being in the
Yeah.
light and recuperating, and no, 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 it's too much to do.
Absolutely. And we can't see these consciously, and we don't know they're there. And yet then we go into the subconscious and we delve into these journeys, and there is so much going on beneath the surface for us that prevents us from healing from these things.
Yeah,
And I truly believe that is our absolute path forward. We heal for ourselves, we heal for our children, we heal for our own health and well-being, but we heal for our resilience and our ability to cope with life and to live from a heart wide open place. Because if we're not careful, these things shut us down so much, and they make us live in a state of fear. And that is such a contracted, small, negative, fear-led space. And I don't want to live my life like that. I don't want to live it like that for me, and I don't want to live it like that for my boys.
no, and you don't. I can see that you don't. But it's like that beautiful quote I can never remember by Marianne Williamson. What our deepest fear is to shine our light, to actually
It
we're
is,
divine
yeah.
beings, live as a divine being, not as part of a machine in the cog, or cog in the
Yeah.
machine. It's
Yeah.
like, yeah,
And it takes bravery and courage and strength and fearlessness and a whole journey of our own personal healing to come to that place
yeah,
from things
absolutely,
that we never even knew were affecting us, you
yeah,
know. And I remember, it's funny because I think I'd done quite a lot of healing before our journey with Marshall, and then through my first part of the journey with Marshall. But I remember the day that I physically felt like I broke in half, and it was so strong. It's still so strong in me now. So the port I described, the port access that we had to go through, actually as a small child is fairly horrific. They come at you with a 3/4 inch needle that's attached to other stuff that they have to pierce through his chest to get into this thing. And for him, this was like the most horrific thing that could happen. And he would be screaming and fighting, and he would know it was coming, and it would be like, Mummy, why are you doing this to me? Mummy, why are you letting them do this to me? Mummy, I don't want them to do this. It's hurting. And the intensity of his fear was so massive. And I'd been able to, I think the other thing that you'll probably get is holding extremes of emotion.
Yeah.
Like, we have to be this container, especially for our children, where we put our stuff to the side. Like, as a parent, like, your shit gets shelved for the time that you have to be there. And you have to have this presence and be able to hold this space for them. Not necessarily saying everything's going to be okay, because you know it might not be, and it's not in their experience too. And the only way I found that I could do it was say, I am here for you. I will be here through all of this. I will hold you, you know, and hold that space in a really big way. And that day that he broke, and that broke me, it took 5 adults to hold him down to do this. And he was curled up in a fetal position on the bed. And people were trying to, because the other thing is, when you're in hospital and you've got surgery, because we were regularly going in for general anaesthetics and surgery and chemotherapy into his spine, there's a theatre list, there's a time slot, and I get that. And you're working with children, they do their absolute best, but we still are part of that machine that has to have this treatment and meet this deadline and get this done. And for Marshall, the longer it went on, the more traumatic it became. So often it was better to just say, I'm really sorry, this has to happen. Do you want to do it here, or on the chair, or on the bed, or holding mummy, or sitting on your own? And so that's what we did in this day, that it took 5 of us to kind of hold him down. I felt myself physically break inside. And that was so hard and so horrible. And after that, it took quite a while for me to be able to go back and do that. And actually, Will had to take over more of the care just immediately, because I said, I can't hold the space that I need to for him, because I'm broken at the moment, and I need some time to come away from that and to be able to come back. So he had to kind of step up and do more, because I literally couldn't at that time. And it's hard, it's really hard going.
Yeah, I can feel that, you know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, it's what you have to do. It's such a warped place, because it's what you have to do for your children, and yet it's not what you want to do at all. It's a very strange place to be.
Yeah. How's Marshall now?
So, amazingly, he is absolutely, incredibly, wonderfully fine. He is now a happy, healthy, full of life, spirited, I will say, 7-year-old who is just out loving life and doing all the things he wants to do. And he's got energy beyond belief now. It was funny, because when I said that Will and I kind of collapsed and were absolutely flattened, after his experience, he kind of went off at 100 miles an hour, whereas we all fell over. We were like, oh God, we've come to the end of this. And he's like, oh, we've come to the end of this. But it was interesting. We've had to give him some, he's actually going through some tests at the moment for autism and various other things, because I do believe that he's on a spectrum somewhere. But equally, we've also had to give him some ways to help him deal with his emotions. So we've missed out on a lot of his growth and development, and him being a child and being able to work with him to process stuff or let stuff out, and also all the things he's been through. You know, there's a huge amount, and it was just coming out as uncontrollable, either kind of violent outbursts or just raw rage. And so we've had to find ways to do that. But like, a year on, and now, yeah, he's amazing. I'm like blown away. So yeah, lots more work to do.
Always. I mean, that's the thing with
Always.
being a parent, it never ends.
Yeah.
But you know, what a journey, and it's just, it's always nice to have a happy ending, isn't it?
Yeah, we have got, do you know what? And I think that's one of the things that I lived through, is gratitude through the whole thing. And it's funny, because we would be sitting, I imagined us sort of having a mountain of normal life over one side, and us sitting on a mountain in the middle, kind of with these big valleys either side, and another valley the other side. And there were parents who didn't have a choice in, you know, there were no, we've got a plan, we've got a path, this is treatable. And at least, even though ours had, you know, varying odds about what could happen, there was some kind of a path there for us.
Yeah.
And I think we lived in extreme gratitude for most of our journey. And that's also what helped get us through, just being grateful for the smallest things.
I think that's it when you're facing death, isn't it? It's kind of like, yeah, this may
Mm.
not, you know, this may end in death. So actually, let's be grateful for every
Yeah,
flipping moment, even the hard
yeah.
ones.
The
And
beautiful
that,
cup of tea. So the
yeah,
cup of tea that somebody made you, that came in a, I remember that, in a proper mug instead of like a crappy hospital cup, you know, like, oh, thank you. You've actually given me a cup of tea in a mug. Like, oh,
yeah, the things we take for granted normally, but become
yeah,
really special. And do you feel like, just to kind of finish off, I'm just wondering, because you mentioned about that kind of,
you
you know,
see.
being hyper vigilant and taking his temperature and all that
Mm.
kind of thing. Do you feel like you've stepped out of that, or is there still a little bit of kind of like, you know, if he gets ill, or, you know, is there still an underlying fear that it's come back, or?
It's really interesting because I think we've done quite well with that, to be honest. But I'm looking at Colby now, and he's, for example, his behavior started to change. He's having some trouble sleeping. He's got dark circles under his eyes. He's
Oh
having
God.
kind of meltdowny tantrums. And I'm thinking, oh no, like this. And then the logical part of me is saying, it would be really unusual if this was, you know, another cancer. And yet there's that part of you that's still going, but it could be, but it could be. And again, it's another level of our healing journey, isn't it? To find our balance and equilibrium.
Yeah, it's surrender to what is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because actually we can't control it.
The free, that's, you've nailed it actually. And that is, it is what it, and I hate it, but I love it. It is how it is. It just is. And we have to get good with where we are and how we deal with that. And there is freedom in the it is.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, thank you, Kat. So many words of wisdom in there, so many little nuggets, and so much beauty, absolute beauty. And hats off to you for, you know, after all of that, you're still here, shining, sane, sane as we can be. So yeah, and you're doing your work. So do you want to tell us before we finish what, you know, what are you doing now? What's you're a
Yeah. So
hypnotherapist? You
So
do
I do. I love it. It's a beauty. It's actually brings me light and joy and fun things like that. So I work with business owners and I heal the hidden wounds of their heart, because all the things that hold us back, like you were saying, maybe it's around visibility or making money or the fears that we hold on to. We don't know what we're holding on to until we release some of that, and then things become a whole lot easier. And so that's where I work, and that's what I love doing. So I use various things, energy healings and heart healing and stuff like that. But I believe we all can rise to have the fearlessness of self, to live the life our soul desires. That's what I want for people. I want everyone to realize their fearless soul self and actually be able to let that out in this life, because we get one. And
Yeah,
as you know, that's it. And it can
make
be
the most
gone
of it.
so very quickly, and it
Yeah,
can change so very quickly. So I want to make the most of every minute that we've got.
yeah. And encourage others to do the same, which is what
Exactly. Yeah.
you do. Thank you so much. That's beautiful. So I'm gonna, all Kat's info will be below this video. So if she needs more clients, there we
Send
go.
them to me.
Yes. And thank you so much for sharing your story, because, you know,
Oh,
there aren't many people who've, you know, heard these kind of stories. You know,
mm.
some, I know people who are just getting diagnoses with children and things like that. There's a lot
It's really tough.
at the moment, and it is tough, and it's, you know, we're lucky now that we're not living in those COVID times, where hopefully there's much more support available to people. And you know, it, like you say, I mean, he came to you, you were meant to go through this, because it's carved out who you are now. And that's how I feel as well. It's kind of like, you know, as hard as it was like, could it get any harder? But there we go, we did it, we've survived, and we've come out the other end, and we're shining. And I just think
Mm.
it's amazing. So yeah, thank you
Thank
so much.
you. It's beautiful to speak to you today. Thank you.
Stop the recording.